if anybody's been unfortunate enough to have had their car stolen and you end up standing there and looking at the space where your car had been because you really can't quite believe that it's not there because it should still be there, and you think if you look hard enough it might just suddenly prove you wrong. It was about 20 minutes. I knew I'd left them by the bed. I looked all around the house many times, walked back, and they were in the doorway. I couldn't have walked over those slippers 10 times while I was looking. I put the linen basket back, I turned round, went to the laundry cupboard, got another face cloth, turned round, back to the sink, and there was the face cloth on the side of the sink. What I did was I shouted. I went, "Aha! I caught you! I caught you that time! I knew it was there, and I caught you doing it." So, the curious conundrum of missing objects. We've all been in a position where we've mislaid our keys or lost our glasses. But what about the times when objects were there 1 minute and seemed to be completely absent the next? Is there something else going on? In this presentation, we'll look at the obvious, the less obvious, and the downright complicated possible explanations for why those pesky objects go missing. I think it would be prudent of me first to provide some real-life cases and examples of missing objects if I'm to convince my good listeners that these objects in question are behaving unusually and are not simply misplaced. So, let us delve into some true examples of DOP, as it is known, or disappearing object phenomena. But first, throughout the presentation, I'll be referencing some very well-known researchers on the subject of DOP, which I'll refer to it in the future, disappearing object phenomena, or JOTT, J-O-T-T, just one of those things. The first is Tony Jinks, a senior lecturer in psychology from Western Sydney in Australia and a consultant to the Australian Journal of Parapsychology. He's investigated some 385 personal accounts of small objects that have unexpectedly disappeared, reappeared, appeared for the first time, or been replaced by another similar object. His book on DOP was published in 2016, and the following cases are contained there within. As a side note, I apologise for the text of the stories and some of the slides. I couldn't decide which would be better, me reading the text from the PowerPoint or you staring at the same picture for 5 minutes straight. So I went for the text. I apologise if you hate it when people read from the slide. I've tried to mix it up a bit, but I'm afraid there is a bit of that. I will try to modulate my voice to keep it more interesting. One evening in August 2008, Kate drove home after work to her small suburban house situated in a quiet residential street. With her car key on the same ring as all her other keys, she selected her front door key and opened the door at the same moment that her telephone rang. Knowing who it would be, she left the door open and dropped her bag to run down the hall to answer the phone. After the call, she went back to take the ring of keys out of the door lock and pick up her bag. The bag was there with contents intact, but the ring of keys was not there. She searched and searched in vain, eventually concluding that someone must have entered the porch and snatched the keys, although the street was empty and there seemed to be no one about. Unable to find them, she was faced with the inconvenient and expensive business of getting a new car key and changing the locks of her front door, back door, garage and mailbox, and cutting a new key for her office. Within the year, she moved to a new job in another city and bought and thoroughly renovated an apartment close to the city centre. One evening, she returned home, placed her new set of keys in the hallway drawer as usual, and then went into her bedroom, only to see her old set of keys on the same ring on her pillow. As she said to Jinx, she felt nauseous and giddy with shock, as no one else could have entered her apartment during the absence. So this is a pretty extreme case, as the person who lost the keys actually moved house and city in the time that the keys had been missing. Not all cases are so extreme, but nearly all cases involve a perfectly ordinary item or items. It usually happens that the item, although ordinary, is of significant importance to the loser. That's not really fair. Let's say owner at the time. Jinx's second example is Mark, who, sitting on the sofa with his large black TV remote control on a cushion beside him, rashly decided to switch television channels while Courtney, his partner, was in the kitchen preparing a snack during an advertisement break. On her return, she was less than pleased, and he hurriedly reached for his remote to switch back, only to find it was not there. Assuming that it must have fallen between the sofa cushions or onto the floor, they searched in vain, turning the sofa upside down and even crawling round the floor on their hands and knees. Unable to find it, Mark bought another one. But a few weeks later, while Courtney was out, he visited the bathroom and returned only to find this remote had also disappeared and remained disappeared despite frantic searching. Later that week, he bought another remote. But a few months later, that disappeared overnight, leaving him completely baffled, as he distinctly remembered that he'd put it in its cradle before going to bed. He then decided that enough was enough and engaged in the healthy, if inconvenient, exercise of getting up from the sofa to change channels and volume via the television controls. Old school. This falls into the category of a disappearance. But it would be interesting to find out whether Mark ever found the TV remote. On talking to a colleague at work this week, she told me of a similar experience she experienced when she lost her dental retainer. She'd put it in before bed and gone to sleep. In the morning, she woke up without the retainer on her teeth. She explained that it was particularly bizarre as the device had to be pulled down quite firmly in order to take it out. Her and her partner looked for it all around the bedroom, bathroom, under the bed, etc. Even stranger was the fact that their bedroom balcony doors were wide open. She looked out into the garden and wondered whether she'd been sleepwalking and thrown the retainer into the garden. A thorough search revealed nothing. When they moved out of the apartment, she was convinced they would find it, but they never did. We'll come back onto Jinx's theories for the explanation of what happens during DOP later in the presentation. Mary Rose Barrington, 1926 to 2020, was a lawyer who campaigned for animal rights and voluntary euthanasia. She had a lifelong interest in paranormal phenomena, carrying out experiments and investigations, and was for many years vice president of the Society for Psychical Research. She collected many hundreds of cases of DOP and coined her own acronym for the curious phenomena, JOTT, just one of those things. In her book, JOTT, she shares 185 cases of JOTT and organises the types of jottle, the displacement of the item, into a comprehensive glossary of terms, leading onto Barrington's theories of what is taking place. In order to understand Barrington's terminology for the types of object disappearance, it will be helpful to share her formal definitions, but there are quite a few. JOTT defined is a collective word like fish, and like it can also be used as singular or plural, an all-purpose word. To define it precisely, JOTT is a spatial discontinuity. It comes in two varieties, one much more familiar than the other. This is the common jottle, which is an unwitnessed displacement. In rare cases, the article is seen to disappear from sight or is felt to elude the grasp, but its displacement to another location is not witnessed, as in a poltergeist movement. The other form of JOTT, designated an odd jot, is difficult to define, and while it may involve some degree of relocation, relocation is not its principal feature. Its character will become clearer when examples are given. First, we take a close look at the more familiar jottle, which takes 6 distinguishable forms. They may be defined with various degrees of precision, but the following are reasonably clear. A walkabout is when an article disappears from the place where it was known to have been and is found in another place. A turn-up. A known article from an uncertain location appears in a place where it's known not to have been before it was found there. Turn-up is like walkabout, but the article's take-off position, if known at all, relies on memory, not on recent observation. Another one, the comeback, is when an article disappears from the place where it was known to have been and is later found back in that same place. This could be a variant of walkabout, and in some cases the jottle might be classed as either. A flyaway. An article disappears from the place where it was known to have been and is never seen again. Note, a flyaway could mature into a walkabout, a comeback, or a trade-in. Flyaway may be known to some readers as the disappearing object phenomenon, or DOP. A windfall is an article of unknown origin. It appears in a place where it could not have been before it was found there. Note, this could be someone else's flyaway. A trade-in. An article disappears from a place where it was known to have been, and a different but similar article of unknown origin appears in approximately the same location. Note, this associates flyaway with windfall. And an odd jot, which is a material irregularity. So, now let me present some of Barrington's most intriguing cases. I have only picked short ones, you'll be pleased to know, because some of them span several pages. If you buy the book, JOTT, you'll be entertained for a long time by reading all of the cases. So here are just a few. The special occasion. Barrington writes, another rich source of jottles from Canada is an article written by Iris and George Owen. A lady's outfit bought for a special occasion could not be found when the occasion came. Some time later, the family moved house and the removers had to disassemble the wardrobe, putting it together again in its new location. When the lady opened the wardrobe, believed by her and the subsequently questioned removers to be empty, there was the outfit hanging on the rail. We are not told the distance between locations in that case, but impressive journeys have often been recorded in many other cases. Case 17, the Little Red Book. The following comeback was the first I encountered personally, and as it had the advantage of backup from a witness, I found it very impressive at the time, convincing enough, in fact, to serve as the springboard for the concept of JOTT. The Little Red Book was an article of minimal interest, being a cash book in which items of petty expenditure were entered. However, it had a shiny red cover that made it clearly visible, unless, of course, it had other items on top of it. The largest entry that was ever recorded in it was the weekly wages paid to my temporary part-time secretary, a friend of mine, DK, who, as she laughingly put it, paid herself by entering in the book the number of hours worked and the amount therefore due to her, and then taking the money from the cash box. When she was ready to leave on a Friday in 1981, she came to me for the cash book, and I pulled the top left drawer of my desk halfway open and put my hand into the drawer, expecting to find the book. Failing to find it, I pulled the drawer out further and trolled with my hand from its furthest depths to its nearest point, feeling my fingers touching the wooden base, and still I did not find the book. I looked in the drawer, then looked up at DK, and she looked at me, while we exchanged words such as, "So where is it?" Where can it be if it's not in its usual place? We then looked again at the open drawer and exclaimed, "There it is!" And there it was. As we've seen with Walkabout, returning articles tend to shout their presence rather than murmur apologies for allowing themselves to be overlooked. It is interesting to note that in this case, 2 people were actively looking for the item. On to the shortest, and I have to say my favourite one of the JOTT stories, the chewed gramophone record. A gramophone record, a 10 or 12-inch disc made of shellac, 10 inches in this case, that had been chewed by a small child, disappeared when the child tossed it in the air. It came back after 5 years' absence, complete with tooth marks. This is surely too bizarre for anyone to make up with an expectation of being believed. I do like that one. I would be interested to know, actually, whether the record just suddenly apparated out of nowhere and clonked somebody on the head as it came down 5 years later. 48, the pocket knife. The informant was cutting a plant stem when his knife seemed to be taken out of his hand. He searched for it very thoroughly several times, cutting the plants in that area back to the bare earth, but eventually he gave up. Returning on impulse about a month later, he saw his knife lying conspicuously on the earth in the place where it had left his hand. Which brings me on to a couple of my own JOTT experiences. I've had many of these experiences, one only 2 days ago. They often happen when I'm not taking notice of the item and can't say whether it was definitely there beforehand. However, these 2 experiences were very definite and very well observed by myself. The first is a turn-up and the second a comeback. I'd originally presumed there was some mischievous spirit playing games with me, and I do still often ask for the items back, calling out to the ether just in case. It was these experiences that propelled me into researching DOP and subsequently discovering Mary Rose Barrington's book and a long journey down this intriguing rabbit hole. So, I've called the first one Slippergate. So this happened about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was just after we'd all gone back to work from lockdown, but I was still doing a lot of teaching from school. So I was at home with nobody else in the house. So this one late morning, went upstairs, thought it was about time I got out of my dressing gown and slippers and stepped out of my slippers by my bed. I went in the bathroom, had a shower, came back out, went into the bedroom to put my slippers on, and they weren't there. So, of course, I thought, oh, what have I done with my slippers? I thought I'd left them by the bed like I usually do. So I trudged back into the bathroom, no slippers. And just as one might do if anybody's been unfortunate enough to have had their car stolen, and you end up standing there and looking at the space where your car had been, because you really can't quite believe that it's not there, because it should still be there, and you think if you look hard enough, it might just suddenly prove you wrong. This is what I did. I trudged backwards and forwards from my bedroom to the bathroom about 10 times. In the end, I went into my children's bedrooms, knowing full well I hadn't put them in there. I went downstairs, I looked around the whole downstairs, I came back upstairs, I went back into the bathroom, all the time talking to the ether. Where can my slippers be? I don't understand. What's gone on with them? I'm sure I left them by the bed, because I am a very prolific talker out loud. Walked from the bathroom back to the bedroom. As I got to the bedroom doorway, my slippers were both next to each other in the doorway of the bedroom, as they are in the picture. Now, I couldn't have walked over those slippers 10 times while I was looking for them, but they came back. It was about 20 minutes. I knew I'd left them by the bed. I looked all around the house many, many, many times, walked back, and they were in the doorway. So that was Slippergate. And then several months later, we have Facecloth Gate. So this was even more odd, and I felt like I might have actually caught it out, whatever it is. Again, another really mundane item. I was at home by myself for some reason again. I'd been cleaning the bathroom. I put a fresh face cloth on the left-hand side of the sink. Couldn't find a picture with it on the left-hand side. Folded it up on the left-hand side. Now, to the left-hand side of the sink is our dirty linen basket. So I'd put this on the sink. I'd turned round behind me to go to the laundry cupboard to get a clean towel out. I went to the cupboard, got the towel out, turned round back to the sink and noticed that the face cloth wasn't there anymore. So, as you do, I thought, oh, it must have fallen off the side of the sink. So I looked all behind the sink, around the side of the sink, then started to feel quite confused. Well, where could it have gone? I was literally looking at it a few seconds ago. So, like you do in these situations, ridiculous. I pulled out the dirty linen basket. I took the lid off the linen basket. I looked in the linen basket. I took everything out of the linen basket, put everything back in, thinking this is absolutely ridiculous. It can't have gone missing. It can't have just gone like that. So, what I did, I admitted defeat. I put the linen basket back. I turned round, went to the laundry cupboard, got another face cloth, turned round, back to the sink, and there was the face cloth on the side of the sink. And what I did was I shouted. I went, aha, I caught you. I caught you that time. I knew it was there, and I caught you doing it, whatever it is. So those are my two, in my opinion, indisputable missing objects, which returned afterwards. So now let's move on to the causes or possible causes for all the missing objects. So stay with me here, it gets very interesting. So now that we've had a good variety of cases, it's time to explore the causes. And as this is just an introduction to DOP, to whet your appetite, we'll not be able, sadly, to dive too heavily into the possible quantum mechanics of possibilities. Rather, briefly dip into the list of theories and explore the top layer of ideas. For anyone wishing to dive wholeheartedly and deeply into the often mind-boggling rabbit hole of possibilities, there is a list of links at the end of the PowerPoint, which will lead you to reading materials you might wish to use to sate your JOTT appetite. I'd be happy to share it afterwards. Of course, we first had to look at the most obvious culprit to blame for this aberration of normality: us. I'm sure that 95% of missing objects are down to us misplacing them, forgetting we had them, absent-mindedness, even dementia in some cases. So for amusement, I asked Google AI what to do when you have a case of DOP. So it came up with possible cause number 1. That was me. Human error. So I will spare you reading all of this slide, but I just want to mention the first bit, which kind of made me chuckle because it's so obvious. When an object disappears, it's often simply out of sight and can be found with a bit of searching. For example, you might have misplaced it in a different location than where you last remembered it, or it might have been moved by someone else. Sometimes objects may seem to vanish entirely, but this is usually due to a combination of forgetting where you placed them and a lack of awareness about their location. Thank you so much, Google. I was very confused. My favourite one is at the bottom: animals. Pets might have moved or played with an object, potentially taking it to a different location. You don't say. But we had to do that. Now, the next thing that made me slightly chuckle was Google's practical tips for finding lost objects. Yes, you can look on Google to find out what to do when you misplace your wallet. So it decided that thinking about your last memory, checking common areas, listen for clues, Did you hear what sound it made? Recreate the scene, or don't assume it's lost forever. And Google reckons that many objects reappear after a few days or even longer, so don't give up on the search too easily. Thank you, Google. That was interesting. All right, enough of that. But before we move on, Google did have a couple of more interesting things to suggest. So, the Vanishing Act for, I guess, the people like us. So, here it is, disappearing object phenomena. Maybe it went into limbo or non-being. It might be lost in a state of non-existence or in a place where it can't be observed. It might be a dimensional shift or glitch. So it might be a shift in reality. So let's go to the paranormal investigator's happy place. Let's speculate further about what it could be, which leads us to possible cause number 2, spirit intervention. Apporting or materialization has long since been a theory for the explanation of moving objects. Some people believe that spirits or ghosts can manipulate objects, move them around, or even cause them to vanish. This belief is often linked to the idea that spirits, possibly of deceased relatives, spirit guides, or even poltergeists, may be expressing frustration or trying to communicate. There are also suggestions that spirits might be attached to objects and travel with them. There's also a belief amongst some people that even elves or fairies could be responsible for the dematerialization and subsequent rematerialization of said objects. Scientific explanations are scarce on this theory, but strong on belief. Many people will simply use this idea as a first port of call, a flippant or jokey theory. Others see it as a serious spiritual belief. Either way, this explanation, however unscientific, is among the most popular in my humble experience. For the record, I am not going to go down the path of physical mediums and mediumship, as this is a contentious side issue in which many people have been found to be fraudulently claiming to make objects apport and disapport. Plus, I'm not convinced it's entirely relevant to this discussion. Right, brings us on to possible cause number 3, interdimensional shift. According to Alison Woods Flourish, psychic medium, the DOP can be explained by movement between dimensions. After having an experience where she lost a tool she used for her nails, only to have it reappear on the coffee table in front of her after having a short nap, she got to thinking about vibrational energy and how it might cause items or people to move in and out of different realities or dimensions. Although her method of investigating the idea may not appeal to the more scientifically minded person, it's nonetheless an interesting theory. She says, "It was not there on the coffee table before. This led me to wonder about different dimensions. Had these objects slipped out of the dimension I was in to a similar location not to be seen by my physical eyes? Or was it me who was vibrating in and out of different dimensions where these objects no longer existed? I had an idea to use my loved and trusted pendulum. I prepared myself and my pendulum in my usual way. I stood in my living room and asked, 'Is this nail tool in a different dimension?' The pendulum swung in a yes motion. I continued to ask, 'What dimension?' and then started with 3rd, all the way up to the 11th. I got a no for all of these questions. Then, when I asked if the object was in the 12th dimension, I received a yes. I was so surprised. I could not imagine why a nail tool would be in the 12th dimension. I mean, do they have nails to file in that dimension? Maybe just curious. I now realise I was the one moving in and out of different dimensions. Everything is energy and always vibrating, including us." So that's Alison's idea of what happens when things go missing. So the next theory, possible cause number 4, our belligerent brains. Yes, our brains can sometimes unsee, ignore, or disregard actual physical objects. Who knew? It's broadly split into 3 main categories, but with many subcategories. A, the scientific account. According to the scientific account, losing things represents a failure of recollection or a failure of attention. Either we can't retrieve a memory of where we set down our wallet, say, or we didn't encode one in the first place. Excuse me. Basically, sometimes our brains just ignore things to suit themselves. My favourite scientific explanation is inattentional blindness. We'll come to that in a second. The brain filters out vast amounts of sensory input, ignoring many physical objects to focus on what's relevant. This process, known as selective attention and habituation, allows us to quickly make decisions and adapt to our environment. Our brains prioritise information based on experience, learning to ignore repetitive or irrelevant stimuli. Subcategories might include inattentional blindness, habituation, selective attention, categorization, predictive processing, contextual information, and levels of processing. So, inattentional blindness is just the one that I will mention at the moment, which describes the following example. We constantly experience only a small fraction of the visual information around us. This means we often don't notice objects or events if we're not actively attending to them. For example, in a famous experiment, people watching a video often miss a gorilla walking through the scene when they're focused on counting the number of basketball passes. Now, you can actually search up this video, and I have to say that I didn't know what was meant to be happening when I watched it, and I didn't see the gorilla. So they're doing a basketball tournament. Your remit is to count how many times the basketball is passed. Meanwhile, a man in a gorilla suit walks all the way through the basketball court, and you don't see him because you're so intent on counting the basketball passes. Catherine Schultz, a staff writer at the New Yorker magazine, is responding to B, the psychoanalytical account. According to it, conversely, losing things represents a success, a deliberate sabotage of our rational mind by our subliminal desires. In the psychopathology of everyday life, Freud describes the unconscious dexterity with which an object is mislaid on account of hidden but powerful motives, including the low estimation in which the lost object is held, or a secret antipathy towards it or towards the person that it came from. Freud's colleague and contemporary Abraham Arden Brill put the matter more succinctly. We never lose what we highly value. So, Catherine Schultz stated, the psychological account is interesting, entertaining, and theoretically helpful. Freud pointed out the remarkable sureness shown in finding the object again once the motive for its being mislaid had expired. But alas, she says, it's untrue. The most charitable thing to be said about it is that it wildly overestimates our species. It seems to say that in the absence of subconscious motives, apparently we would never lose anything at all. Which brings us on to the third and final brain blip. C, the Troxler effect, also known as Troxler fading. It's an optical illusion where a stationary visual stimulus in the periphery of your vision fades away when you fixate your gaze on a central point for a sustained period. This fading is a result of your brain's adaptation to unchanging visual information, effectively filtering out what it perceives as non-essential details. Think of the dot test when you have an eye test at the optician's. When you fixate on a point, the brain prioritizes processing information at that point and starts to ignore or suppress the unchanging stimuli in your peripheral vision. The fading effect can be quite noticeable, making stationary objects in the periphery seem to disappear or become less vivid. The brain's ability to adapt to unchanging visual stimuli is a natural process that allows us to focus on what's most important in our environment. Which brings us on to possible cause number 5, which is kind of big. Physics, including probability, the causal directive, matter, particles, deactualization, and quantum mechanics. Wave function collapse in particular. Okay, deep breath. Are you ready? It's way beyond my pay grade to be trying to make the most difficult physics into nice bite-sized understandable chunks, but let's have a go. Mary Rose Barrington gives a long explanation of her thought process, which I've attempted to paraphrase at the end of this PowerPoint for anyone who cares to look. Again, I'm happy to forward the PowerPoint to anyone who requests it. For the rest of us, I'll attempt to explain it as I see it. First, through merciless paraphrasing of Barrington's theories, then I'll sum it up through a layperson's eyes, i.e. me. Bearing in mind, I dropped physics when choosing my exam options aged 13 years, so stay with me. Barrington comes to the conclusion that the evidence indicates that human minds in the vicinity are involved in the action of deactualization and reactualization. I see probability as built into the cosmos rather than imposed on it. And the causality directive, the idea that a cause must precede its effect, belongs some way down the hierarchy of mind layers, starting with the cosmic mind. Furthermore, I am prepared to assert that all reality, universe, existence, past and future potentialities, everything everywhere is embraced within the cosmic mind, which has no beginning or end. Therefore, there is a dominance of mind over matter. An article disappears, and it disappears as a unit, something that is a coherent mental concept. We do not find that a tabletop has disappeared, leaving 4 legs supporting nothing, or that the legs have left an unsupported table. The mind, which is what matters, conceptualizes and materializes this collection of particles as a unit that must be present or absent as a whole. Matter, it seems, can exist in the form of particles or in the form of waves, which I understand to be vibrations. According to the fairly widely accepted Copenhagen school of thought, matter does not take particle form unless it is observed, whether by sensors or sensors, and when it is not being observed, it lapses into vibrational form. The Copenhagen school has given the explanation: if for some reason my unconscious powers of observation have decided that it would be advantageous for me not to observe my keys, which I conceptualize as a coherent unit, they deactualize as a unit from particle form to vibrational form. Articles placed with deliberation usually remain stable, and those that come and go are typically articles set down on automatic pilot in their usual place. Before things can be deactualized, they have to be there. Things exist in the real world because the entities experience them, observe them, and actualize them in particulate form, in particle form. So basically, things exist, and then if you're not thinking about it, it may fade into a vibrational form until your unconscious thinks it back into reality. Sometimes you get it right and it comes back. Sometimes you get it wrong and it comes back a long time later, or not at all. The main idea as with the wave function collapse, is that our minds, which is a measuring apparatus, have a definite effect on the environment and can transition matter from multiple states, i.e. vibrational, to a definite state where it exists in reality. Oh, ow, my head hurts. Now, we've dragged ourselves out of the wormhole of quantum physics. Let's shake ourselves off and have a little rest by winding up with some data, such as it is, for Kristian. Obviously, we don't have scientific data, graphs and formula to explain DOP and JOTT. It has not been peer-reviewed in scientific papers, nor appeared as a serious topic of discussion in the New Scientist. However, I did find some facts and figures which might keep some of you slightly mollified. With the prior research and classification of some 185 cases of the same phenomenon by Barrington as his guide, Jinks decided to submit his much larger database to a thorough statistical, tabled analysis as to the objects most frequently involved, such as jewellery items, as in rings, brooches and necklaces, single food and beverage items, keys, items of clothing, small computer items such as USB sticks and mice, television remote controls, grooming items such as combs, brushes, hair clips and tweezers, kitchen utensils such as knives and forks, wristwatches, wallets, credit and debit cards, individual coins, stationery, small tools and so on. He found that in order of JOTT activity, the most common behaviours were disappearance and later reappearance of that object, often in the same place, but sometimes elsewhere in the house. The unfamiliar appearance of a new object that could not be accounted for, and unrecognised similar types of object replacement and sometimes disappearance for good. Jinks also classified jottled objects according to their monetary or personal value and experience, as whether the experience was a one-off or repeated over months or years. Males and females seem roughly equally affected overall, but this ratio varied according to type of object. So, for example, women were affected more than men with regard to jewellery. The great majority of JOTT experience were adults from their 20s onwards, and as far as Jinks could judge, they were ordinary members of the public who had little or no prior knowledge or interest in parapsychology, no beliefs or practice in magical phenomena, had no idea what this experience had happened, that this experience had happened to anyone else, and were baffled and often emotionally disturbed as to their own state of mind by their experience. No significant difference was found between levels of education, or types of career, or occupation, and frequency of reported occurrences. When 80 people volunteered to take part in an anonymous survey without knowing the purpose of the study and were asked if they had ever experienced an incident such as a strangely behaving object, and if so, what was the nature of their experience, the result was completely unexpected. It had been assumed that very few, if any, such cases would be reported, but 42 participants, which made 52%, reported having had a jottling experience. This implies that maybe at least half of the adult population have experienced an unexplainable object disappearance, reappearance, appearance or replacement. Dismissed in baffled exasperation at the time as just one of those things, because there seemed no other explanation to hand, while sensing that something genuinely mysterious had occurred. So, to finish, it's a complicated subject, much more so than it seems on first viewing, as it were. The theories presented in this presentation are certainly not exhaustive, but simply the dip of the proverbial toe into the sea of possibilities regarding JOTTs and DOP. If I've whetted your appetite to find out more about this fascinating subject, then I'll consider my job done. Thank you for listening to me, and to Caroline and Kristian for inviting me to speak. Please be kind with the questions, as I previously mentioned, as I am no physicist.
But we have an ask of you. We ask that you hit the like button here. We ask that you hit the subscribe button. Now, the reason is, for you it is just a moment, but for us it really helps the algorithm find our content and other people find what really is deeply interesting to them.
We've had examples of JOTT that happen here. I'm reading here now about the slipper case. We had the Sport Watch heart monitor gate. So Martin he's an endurance runner, and he wanted to have his monitor so that he could monitor his heart rates before he got one with it all included on the watch. So he went and plugged it into the usual place next to his chair in the lounge on a little table that's there, and came back to get it the next morning to go out on his 30-mile run, and it wasn't there. And he's like, well, did you move it? And I said, no, I don't touch your sports watch. It should just be there. It went 3 months, and he thought, right, I need to now go and buy a new watch. And he ordered a brand new watch with the heart rate monitor in the wrist, and we had everybody searching. I pulled the chairs out, I pulled all the things out. We have a cleaner that comes around every now and again to help deep clean the house for us. She pulled everything out, nowhere to be seen. But literally the day after buying his new sports watch with the heart rate monitor in it, it turned up.
Gosh. Well,
so the new watch arrived, and the new watch went missing for a month. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's our heart monitor sports watch gate. Yeah, it's a very odd one that we don't know how to explain away, because there is a certain place that he charges, and the watch never moves away from that zone. So yeah, it did turn up, but it was like 3 months later.
You see, this is where, although I think the physics sort of explanation is very good, it is theoretical, and it does make me think, but he was obviously thinking about that watch because he was going to use it. So he hadn't sort of not thought about it, and it wasn't an incidental item. So the theory kind of falls down there.
Can't explain it. It's very strange. But Kristian Lander, in relation to that, said, is it more emotional or environmental factors, stress, distraction, and it amplifies the experiences more psychological than paranormal? I guess that's where maybe a poltergeist might come in, if it's a poltergeist type activity link, maybe.
Yeah. And I think it, obviously, like many paranormal things, it's very hard to prove, because you can't do a repeatable experiment. I mean, you can try, but it might, it's probably not going to work.